Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What's the scariest, most unsettling experience of your life? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. This happened while I was in my hometown visiting family and friends last summer. My best friend and I were parked outside of my mother's house smoking cigarettes and catching up, when all of a sudden I felt a warm light on my face. I looked out of my car window, and to my right, roughly 10 feet in front of me, was a floating ball of light. It was bright red-orange in the center, but became more yellowish as the ball expanded slightly. The brightness and size of the object should have cast off some kind of light, but the homes around it stayed dark, as did the ground. I was at a loss for words, and I couldn't move. I just stared. My best friend finally realized I was entranced. She turned her head to look at me, and that's when she saw it too. I'd been watching for about a minute at this point, the ball of light hovering delicately in the air. The slow, calculated movements began to get a little faster, and the ball condensed from a large oval back to a rounder ball about the size of a basketball. It then floated quite quickly behind some houses and disappeared. We just sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to piece together what we just saw. We haven't spoken about what we saw that night since, and even the memory leaves me with a strong sense of missing something. I'm not sure what I saw that night, but it will stay with me forever. My mom flips houses, kind of like the show on HGTV. I go with her sometimes to help clean the houses initially because you never know what you run into in a dilapidated property. I go to one about a year ago. My mom tells me once we were inside that the previous tenant hanged himself in the basement. Great, thanks for the warning, Mom. At one point I had to go in the basement for some reason. It was unnaturally large for a house in the city and very dark. All of a sudden the door leading upstairs closes, and my flashlight dies at the same time. I was mobbed by an absolutely oppressive presence at once. It felt like utter madness and despair. I freaked out because I was in total darkness, and this guy Spectral was rushing over to greet me and began to scream. My mom rushed down because if her 23-year-old weightlifting son is screaming, there's a serious problem. I try to explain what happened and written off as having an overactive imagination in lieu of the circumstances surrounding the house vacancy. I know this sounds like something on r/no sleep, but that malevolent grasp was real. I physically felt it. I know there's a rational explanation for this, but it is what I saw. It was a pitch-black rural road in Pakistan. The kind of road where there are simply no cars, no buses, no domiciles, no farms, nothing. Absolutely nothing but undeveloped land on both sides of the road. Just open, arid land. What I'm saying is, there's nothing out here. When in our car headlights, I definitely see something moving in the distance. I'm in the passenger seat, and this figure is on my side. And at first, very first, it seems like a large animal, like a cow or buffalo or something, because it walks very not human. As the driver slows down and starts the blaring the horn to alert this thing, it turns its head, and it's a very, very frightening old face of a woman with orange ringlets framing her face, and her eyes are really black. But this is not the scariest part. The scariest part that I could clearly make out was that her hair was not human-like, and while she stood on two legs, the feet were at the bottom, were completely turned around, backwards. Her feet were backwards. I had a panic attack and passed out in the car. When I was a sophomore in college, I got a knock on my door. I'd just gotten off the phone with my girlfriend who had been lecturing me on how I was a dick and never did anything nice. This is integral to the story. I answered the door, and there was a guy who gave me a story about how his wife was in labor in a city about an hour away, and he needed a ride to his friend's house so he could borrow his car. Normally I would have laughed and slammed the door in his face, but due to the lecture from my girlfriend, I decided today was the day I began being the nice guy. I agreed to give the guy a ride. He seemed nice enough. We talked about basketball and video games. He had me drive him to a really far off and remote apartment complex that was still under construction. Weird, but I went along with it. When we get there, he directs me to park in an alley really far off. Then he starts going on about how he needs money too. I figure, you know what, I've gone this far. I might as well see this good deed through. I give him a $10 bill. Then he goes on about how that isn't enough to get where he needs to go. I give him all the money I have, including the change in my car, about $46. He gives me a strange look, and there's a weird silence where it seems like he doesn't know how to react. Then he gives me a really genuine thank you and gets out of the car. I go home and go on with my day. About an hour later, there's a knock on my door. It's a cop. I answer and he asks me if I've seen this guy. He shows me a picture of the guy I gave a ride to. No mistaking it was him. Same hair, same neck tattoo, same gold teeth. I say, yeah, I just gave him a ride like an hour ago. The cop looks like he just saw a ghost. Then he proceeds to tell me about how this guy is wanted for 3 murders. His standard procedure is going door to door until he finds someone who's stupid enough to give him a ride. Then he leads them to a remote location, pulls a gun, executes them, and steals their car. It's extremely ironic that being nice almost got me killed and probably saved my life at the same time. Okay, so this happened when I was like 3 years old, but I remember it like it was yesterday. So one night me and my brother were sleeping in our room. We shared a bed, and I remember hearing a hissing sound and waking up to seeing a huge-ass snake crawling up my wall. I was frozen in fear. I couldn't move, nor did I want to. Out of fear, the snake would attack. What happened next happened in a blur. I remember my brother, who was lying right beside me, snatching me up, and we ran, and he got me and my sister. My parents went out, and he was babysitting us out of the house. Thank goodness, literally all of my family lived on the road, which is named after us. So we went to my grandparents' house next door, and my granddad killed the snake. This may not seem that scary to some, but it definitely scared me. I'm deathly afraid of snakes and will freeze up if I see one, even if it's a picture of one. Also, every time I lay down in bed, I'm constantly worrying about snakes, even though we no longer live in that old house, and it happened 14 years ago. When I was about 14 years old, I worked at a summer camp at our town pool. One morning during camp, I was laying on the edge of the pool with my legs in the water, torso out on the pavement, relaxing. I started to hear a really distant noise. Not quite annoying exactly, but loud enough and persistent enough to make me wonder where it was coming from. I popped up and looked around to see if I could locate the source of the sound. I was sitting near a fence that was located behind me, with the parking lot on the other side of it, and I noticed 2 guys were in the parking lot by their car with the doors open. I thought maybe they had the radio on, and I could hear it from where I was sitting. No big deal, until it started to get louder. Now I'm starting to freak out. It sounds like a mumbled, unintelligible conversation. I keep looking around me, confused and now starting to get scared. I can't locate the source of the sound, and it keeps getting louder and louder. The voices in the conversation get clearer. I jump to my feet, still looking around, and nothing. No one is near me. Where is this coming from? I start walking away from the pool, and all of a sudden the voices, as clear as day, as if there were 4 or 5 people standing in a circle around me saying, "Enjoy oranges, enjoys oranges, ha ha ha." What? Enjoys oranges, what? At this point I start crying and running at the same time. As I run, the voices get more mumbled and die down a bit. I ran halfway across the park to the playground and sat on the swings. I waited for the voices to die down completely. When they were gone, I regained my composure and went on with my day. That was the first and last time that ever happened to me. Freaked me the fuck out. And to this day, I'll never know why that happened. Maybe stress, some sort of schizoaffective episode, paranormal activity, I don't know. But that's the scariest, most unsettling thing that's ever happened to me. I predicted the sudden death of 2 different family members the day prior in each case. When I was 8, I was supposed to stay at my grandmother's house overnight. Her newish husband, not my grandfather, was there, and I'd met him previously without issue. When I saw him that day, I remember his face was terrifying to me, and I couldn't look him in the eyes. I refused to stay there and had a full-on child mental breakdown when my mom attempted to leave me, screaming hysterically, saying I was sick, fake retching, and I told my mom that he had died in the past tense. She apologized to him, scolded me, and took me home. Next morning, we got a call that he died in his sleep from a stroke. I remember my mom screaming as she got the call and then shaking and asking how I knew he was going to die. I had no idea, I just remember thinking I'd caused it for a while. Second instance was when I was 12. My great aunt, who lived in Japan, had given my parents some seeds years earlier for some Japanese flowers, and they'd planted them in our backyard. The flowers had seeds that popped when you lit them with a lighter, so I used to sneak lighters and burn them. I got caught with the lighter, and being a shy kid, I thought I'd destroy the plant with the lawnmower to get back at my parents. I mowed over it while cutting the grass, and when my upset mom told me it was a gift from my aunt, I said something along the lines of, "Who cares? She's probably dead already." A few days later, we were told that she had died. Later, we found out she hung herself in her garage as she was dying of colon cancer, had no money and no immediate family. She died 2 days after my lawn mowing incident. I had nightmares, and some daymares too, of some weird thing using my great-uncle to come after me with a nose. I'd sometimes swear my great-uncle was hanging in the hallway. He committed suicide by hanging, but he was great to me. What happened with my great-uncle is that he ran out of money, so his younger brother offered an old shitty house that had only cold running water and an outhouse as a place to live. Something didn't feel right there. I used to cry when it was time to visit him, and I told my mom something was bad about the house. I had nightmares about it. I think I was just picking up on my great-uncle's despair. He lived alone in the middle of nowhere, was in barely surviving mode, and didn't even have anything around him to quiet his mind. If he could have even just been moved to a city where there were people and a library, that may have helped. Either way, just bad feelings all around. And it eventually got to him too. Decades later, when drinking with my little sister, our conversation turned to our youth, and I told her the dream. She claimed the same thing, except that rather than being after her, it was after me. She said he'd hang in her closet and say he was going to hang me. One other weird thing is that while playing with the cats by our barn, I suddenly had a bad feeling. I turned around and there was a rope in the window hanging in the shape of a noose. I freaked out and ran back to the house. Later I did investigate, and then could see it was just a rope hanging in such a way to make it seem like a noose through the window. But from inside the barn, it was just a rope not wrapped and hanging correctly. We were more affected by his suicide than anyone knew, despite people trying to keep it from us. That's pretty sad all around, and tough for you to go through as a kid, and obviously tough for your uncle as well. Sorry it kind of went the way it did. I was about 10, and at my friend's house for the night, their mom went around the corner to have a drink with the neighbor. It was like 11 o'clock, and me and one of my friends, one of three, headed out to walk the door. Small neighborhood, everyone knows each other and all of that, so we're heading around the block chatting about nothing in particular and hearing someone cough behind us. We turn around and there's this tall man with graying hair behind us, like right behind us. You think he was our dad or something. He smiled and was like, "Oh, hello girls, out late are we?" At which point the dog starts barking. We just stare at him, try and shush the dog, apologize, and then take off down the street. He was following us, so at some point he just up and ran, turned the corner, and went bolting inside the house. My friends had one of those glass doors with a sheer curtain, so you could somewhat see through it and somewhat see outside. Anyway, we go inside to explain to a friend's sister, 8 and 12, what happened. They laugh and tell us we're taking the horror movies too seriously. We argue, but a few minutes put on a different movie. A few minutes later, I hear a cough from the window that was slightly open and I'm bugging out, but no one else heard it. A few minutes after that, the oldest of our group looks over and is like, someone's at the door. So she gets up and goes toward it. But the door starts making noise, like someone trying to open it. At that point, we're all freaking out. I'm the sacrificial lamb. I move the curtain a little and look out to see the man from the walk. We turned off the TV and all the lights and turned off the phone, wireless. The phone makes no noise, which means it's dead and we can't find it. He stays outside and keeps saying, "Girls, open the door through the window." Me and my friend, who walked the dog, end up grabbing kitchen knives and head out into the backyard, where the fence in part shares with the neighbor where their mom is staying. So climb the fence and go knock on the door frantically and scale the bejesus out of the woman who opens the door. We explain ourselves and weaponry, and the neighbor and friend's mom start walking with us back to the house. When we round the corner, the man is standing on the front steps trying to open the door. He took off when we saw us, and we called the police to file a report. Nobody slept that night. One night around 5 or so years ago, I had a friend over to drink at my mom's place. The house was around 110 years old, so we finish up around 2 or 3 and everyone leaves. So I go to bed sufficiently buzzed but not overly drunk. I must not have slept long before being awoken to seeing my friend Sydney standing at the foot of my bed wearing a red dress. I was pretty confused, and being that I was half awake and kind of drunk, I couldn't be sure what I saw, but I do remember saying, "Sid, what are you doing here still? Just go home, I'm trying to sleep." She stood there by my bed, not moving and staring at me, and I just put my head to my pillow and went to sleep. I think I brought it up with her the next day, and she says she was never there, and we both thought it was extremely weird, but we agreed I was just drunk. Anyway, fast forward a couple months. I had to go pick up my sister from a party around 2 a.m. I get her, and as we drive home, we pull up to the driveway. She asks, "Hey, do you have friends over tonight?" "No, why?" I replied. "Well, there's a girl in a red dress in your window. It looks like your friend Sydney." I explained to her what happened a few months prior, and we kind of freaked out a bit. The house had some strange goings on. When me and my sister were younger, I was around 10 and she was 7-ish, and my mom was driving us home from piano lessons. Things were going normal as per usual, and then we drive by the big cornfield near our house on a quiet street where my mom stops the car in the middle of the road and just looks at the cornfield. Me and my sister are both looking around like, Mom, what?" She then proceeds to look terrified, run out of the car, and just freak us the fuck out. It was so confusing. She comes back in, totally fine, like nothing had just happened, and drives home. We both brushed it off as something not super important. Fast forward 10 years, and me and my sister drive past the same place again and get that weird memory, like we'd forgotten it ever happened. Anyway, we ask my mom, and she actually thinks we were crazy. But I can't shake the feeling there was a little glitch in the system and something weird happened. It just didn't seem like my mom. I had just moved into my first apartment with a roommate, but the first week he was on vacation, so I was home alone. He was kind of a pothead and had mentioned feel free to have some if I wanted, including his THC pills. So being a fan of horror films, I took a pill and turned on the remake of Evil Dead. It was about 1 a.m. at this point, and I began to hear screams and sad mournings. I would then pause the movie, thinking maybe it was from that. I'd hear nothing, so I'd press play again only to hear it again. But something sounded weird. Why was it coming from my front door? And the movie has nothing to do with visually with that sound. So I paused it and ran to my front door, trying to peek through the eye hole and listen through the crack in my door, but I heard nothing, just silence. I slowly walked back to my couch, and at this point I'm thinking, oh shit, is this all in my head from the THC pill? I turned the movie on again, and boom, again, the sound of crying or just overall sadness was coming from the hallway. I decide at this point it's in my head and turn up the TV much louder. Again, I keep hearing it. This time I hear a bang like someone punching the wall outside. I paused the movie and ran to the front door. This time I keep hearing it, loud and clear. It sounded like a male crying. All I could think of was someone getting beat up, stabbed, or shot. I wanted to open the door and see, but moving to a big city from a small one and really high, I got super paranoid and, well, scared. So I just did what I did and tried to make out what I was hearing or see something through the peephole. Still nothing. And about 10 minutes later, I decided to turn on the movie. And this time, just crank it. I also did not have a cell phone at this time, otherwise I would have called the front desk. The next morning I went out thinking, God, if there was blood everywhere, I'm going to feel so bad for not trying to help. Anyway, I told my roommate about this, and he definitely had a laugh. Then one day we got a knock on the door, and there was this kid making the same sounds trying to get into our apartment once we opened the door. It turns out all those sounds were from this kid who was mentally challenged and had locked himself out of his parents' apartment. I feel terrible, as I normally would have helped, but I'm glad it wasn't someone dying in our hallway.